Welcome to the It's All Good show. I am Dr. Dream and very excited for today's guest. My guest is Dane Wigington. Dane is the lead researcher and administrator for the website geoengineeringwatch.org and is the executive producer for the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary, The Dimming. He has a background in solar energy, was a former employee of Bechtel Power Corporation, and was a licensed contractor in California and Arizona. Dane has devoted the last 20 years of his life to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt them. His personal residence was featured as a cover article in the world's largest renewable energy magazine, Home Power. He manages a wildlife preserve next to Lake Shasta in Northern California. He's appeared in numerous films and interviews in his effort to educate the public on the extremely dire environmental and health dangers we face from the ongoing global climate intervention operations. Dane, welcome to the It's All Good show.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Dream. Thanks for addressing this most dire issue of what's occurring in our skies.
It's been a while since you and I have connected. I was looking back through our history a little bit. We first met in 2012 at the Consciousness Beyond Chemtrails conference in Los Angeles. And then by 2014, you were on a podcast that I was doing at the time. And I also had the opportunity to visit you at your house there in Northern California.
I remember. Yeah, time goes by quickly. The forest doesn't look uh, like it did then. It's dying by the day here, and the people are amazingly oblivious to that fact.
So my first question, this you've been doing this for a while. What I mean, and since I was connected to you back then and everything, what has changed?
Everything's gotten worse. Again, when you interfere with the planet's primary life support systems with highly toxic elements, you can only get a bad result. And the for your listeners that don't know what climate engineering is or it's about or what its stated purpose is, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement. Those are some of the science terms for what's occurring in our skies. The jet dispersing of light scattering particles, nanoparticles, all of which are toxic: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, surfactants, and more. And to do this, although it's possible to temporarily and toxically cool down some daytime high temperatures, you create more overall heat. You trap more heat than you deflect because it traps heat at night. It's destroying the ozone layer, it's disrupting the hydrological cycle, and it's contaminating virtually everything on the planet, including every breath we take. And that's not speculation. We've done hundreds and hundreds of lab tests, and there's so much contamination coming down on our precipitation. It's killing soil microbiome, killing root systems. Have you seen, Dr. Dream, when the wind blows now, every storm that happens, trees are falling over everywhere. Root balls are flipping up out. They're not snapping and breaking, although the tensile strength of the trees is weakening as well because of this contamination. But um, have you seen all the tree falls that happen? It's
Yeah, it's
becoming more
been
common.
crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the
So,
fires becoming more challenging and harder to control.
yes, about the fires, this is most directly linked to climate engineering, and that is not a denial of all the other forms of damage we've done to the planet. There's unfortunately far too many online that are in that camp, that pretending we haven't really harmed the planet, although we've laid waste to the planet in the geologic blink of an eye. But the planet is warming radically, and climate engineering is a part of that, not the only part, of course, but it is making an already bad situation exponentially worse. And in regard to the fires, climate engineering is the most implicated because it must rain more on a rapidly warming planet, not less. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. Based on unfiltered frontline data with accurate pre-industrial baselines, we appear to be about past 3.5 C right now. And if it's not raining more, there's a reason. And that reason is climate engineering. And the desiccant particles block direct sunlight. They disrupt the hydrological cycle completely. So although we have massive deluges like we just had in North Carolina, we have much more protracted droughts. And we're the victims of that in the West. We can see them cutting off the flow of precipitation here with satellite imagery. They can manipulate the jet stream patterns, and the desiccant particles have a dispersing effect on precipitation. It depends on the size of particle being seeded. But in the case of California, if we go back 10 years, the presentation I did called Engineered Drought Catastrophe, Target California, everything I said would happen then has happened. It had to happen if these programs are allowed to continue. And you might remember, Dr. Dream, the rain apocalypse and snow apocalypse of 2 years ago in California that was highly sensationalized.
Yeah.
So people want to pretend that we're not under drought now. And just because we get a few deluges doesn't end droughts. That those deluges don't sustain forests when they're over a condensed period of time, and when those deluges contain toxic elements. And the frozen precipitation, have you seen, Dr. Dream, the baseball and softball size hail that's now the norm?
Yeah, it's crazy. I've been spending time in the Midwest, and it's just outrageous what we see as far as the size of hail now.
Yeah, that's chemical ice nucleation. That is from the elements being seeded into cloud moisture in the attempt to create a cold, dense layer of air that descends to the surface to lower temperatures to mask this true severity of planetary total meltdown. And the hail is so bad, insurance companies are canceling policies because of that hail now. And no one asks any questions as to why is this happening. And of course, the so-called climate science community blames massive hail on global warming or climate change. As nothing to do with that. There would and should be less, not more, frozen material falling from our skies. But again, we have a climate science community that's we can speculate either criminally ignorant of the very field of study in which we're told they're experts, or they're lying to protect paychecks and pensions. Take your pick. In the case of National Weather Service and NOAA, the nation's weathermen, we know they have a federal gag order on them, an illegal federal gag order. But down to the local meteorologist that's reading a script that's passed down to them by NWS and NOAA, and that script is done by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, two private defense contractors that are neck deep in climate engineering operations, and they do the modeling for the nation's weathermen. Why would that be? Because they need the script to match. So those that are involved with the weather manipulation need to draft the script of the scheduled weather. So everybody's pretending this isn't going on in our skies when any but the clinically blind should be able to see this and connect the dots.
So, Dane, who's doing this and where's the money coming from?
Well, it's the same source. It's those who print the money. And this is where many Americans, unfortunately, don't understand how the monetary system works or how the levers of power and control work. But obviously, those who control the flow of money control everything else. They control militaries, thus they control governments, media. They control the narrative. So you may have noticed, Dr. Dream, there's a lot more awareness on this issue in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Hurricane Helene started that. And because it was absolutely, we recorded the frequency transmissions that manipulated that storm once it was over land. There's no theory or hypothesis or conjecture. That storm was steered. The moisture was steered with patented processes of frequency transmissions. I don't know if you've seen that video. It's a 90-second recording that we my wife actually painstakingly put that together. And there's no scientifically arguing the transmissions they have a repelling effect on the air mass of the storm. It's a network of transmitters in the US called the NexRad network. And so a lot of people caught wind of that, and they've never seen this kind of behavior from a storm before. And we can speculate as to the agendas and objectives, but a lot of people are awake now. And I'm communicating directly with congressmen from the Carolinas, from Tennessee, Connecticut. Many are waking up to this issue now. In fact, CNN I just did an exchange, two exchanges with Infowars and Alex Jones, and CNN picked up on that, and they just did a piece trying to debunk the exchange I had with Alex, with a very transparent and really shoddily done attempt at quote debunking that this isn't happening because they say it isn't happening, and their attempt to mask this is getting very frail and transparent.
Now, as far as the hurricanes go, those were natural hurricanes until they were affected by these technologies?
That's a good question. Very good question. The oceans are superheating. So can they spawn cyclonic rotations? Absolutely. Absolutely. But we do know, because of the weather makers' ability to manipulate atmospheric pressure zones, they can create conditions that are either uh, conducive to storm formation or detrimental to storm formation. So we can't speak definitively as to any particular storm's formation, but the fact that it's being steered, most especially when it's over land, is not debatable. It's not debatable. So what we see happening is, because the storms are so difficult to steer when they're at full strength, the more organized they become, the more difficult they are to affect with a low amount of input, which, storms are a huge amount of energy, and people seem to think, well, it must take an equal amount of energy to manipulate it. That's not true. The less organized they are, the less input it takes to manipulate that storm formation. So in the case of Hurricane Milton, do you remember, Dr. Dream, it became much stronger much sooner than they originally scheduled.
Absolutely.
So it drifted southeast into the Yucatan. It seemed to get hung up a little close to the Yucatan. And there's a very powerful transmitter in Cancun. And the governments are all working together on this. We have congressional documents proving this, some 800 pages long, available at geoengineeringwatch.org. So the Cancun transmitter energized, and again, it has a repelling effect on that air mass and seemed to bump it loose and back on track. And again, the degree to which they are able to manipulate the planet's life support systems at this point should scare the hell out of anybody. And for those that doubt this, I would encourage them. Dr. Dream, have you ever seen the recording of Lyndon Johnson in 1962 ranting like a lunatic? That it's the first 30 seconds of every weekly geoengineeringwatch.org broadcast, Global Alert News. It's non-commercial, non-political, and it's on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. But our first 30 seconds is a video of Lyndon Johnson, 1962, former U.S. president, ranting like a lunatic, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. How far have they come with their technology to this point? And so did you happen to see, Dr. Dream, President Biden stating last week how, I don't know what exact words he used, how crazy it was to think that the U.S. government could manipulate the weather? Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
So people should stop and ponder that. I mean, that's just a blatant lie. When we have the U.S. government so effective at manipulating the weather, even in Vietnam, this is historical record, Project Popeye, they were so effective at it that governments passed international treaties by the 70s forbidding weather manipulation in wartime, INMOD treaties. So again, if we go back even further, Project Cirrus, 1947, the U.S. military's first publicized hurricane manipulation operations, and with an incredibly small amount of input to a hurricane, it was less than 100 pounds of dry ice. It appeared to alter the trajectory of that storm, and so much so that instead of going out to sea, it turned and made landfall. And there was a lot of legal actions pending because of that, until they denied what they did. They denied any effect. They clearly went off the radar with their operations at that point. Um, again, these are patented processes of climate modification at this point. The effect is inarguable, and it's isn't it interesting that people believe that a single engine Cessna airplane, you've seen the publicized weather modification operations, right, Dr. Dream, where you have a propeller driven single engine aircraft with some flares on the wings. You've seen those, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny, the public, or it's perplexing, I should say, that the public believes that that can modify the weather, but a massive military juggernaut with tankers that can carry 100 tons of toxic climate engineering nanoparticles in a single payload. No, that can't be happening. And that wouldn't affect the weather. We have a virtual denial. CNN, in regard to the discussion I had with Alex on InfoWars, virtually denying that it's even possible to manipulate the weather when we have hundreds of publicized operations all over the globe every year. I mean, the denial at this point is ludicrous. And I can't express with enough urgency. You've known me for a long time, and you know how much I've been trying to trumpet this warning from the rooftop at the grave and immediate threat these operations posed. And that threat has manifested since that time, and it is very advanced now. And the vast majority have no understanding yet of how damaged the planet's life support systems are, how contaminated soils are, every breath we take. We can't hide from this, and we have to deal with it, or we're not going to be here long.
And it just amazes me how people can be in that denial. I mean, I maybe understood it, the denial back in 2012, but today in 2024, and with all this documentation and everything, and people are still just, I mean, turning their backs on it. It's frustrating. It's got to be incredibly frustrating for you.
It is. It is. Thank you for chiming in on that in that way, because yeah, it's truly mind-numbing that people can't look up and with deductive reasoning determine something is clearly going on when you have grid patterns in the sky one day, nothing the next. You don't see blue skies anymore, even a sky where you don't see the aerosol dispersed filth or clear linear trails. You don't see blue. If you block the sun out, you see a silvery white, sort of pale blue sky at best, because the atmosphere is so full of particulate matter at this point. In fact, extracted Dr. and 100 likely annual global dispersion of these particulates based on what's falling on the state of Minnesota, and extrapolating that globally, it appears 40 to 6 million tons is being dispersed globally. 40 to 60 million tons, and we're breathing all this. These are very bioavailable particles. People don't know how small a nanoparticle is. You can put 100,000 across the width of a single human hair. They're inconceivably small. So they're bioavailable. When you inhale them, they go straight through the olfactory nerve into the bloodstream, across the blood-brain barrier. And is it any wonder that we have microplastics showing up in every single human organ, especially the brain, including aluminum showing up as well? And yes, we have contaminants everywhere. Yes, we have decomposing plastics everywhere, but these particles appear to be manufactured. Their uniformity indicates they're manufactured or refined. And the same with aluminum. If it's free-form aluminum, and it is, that means it's been mined and refined and dispersed. It's not just some blowing strata around in the sky, which we have meteorologists trying to claim that in order to protect their paychecks and pensions. Free-form aluminum doesn't exist in nature, period. It's always bonded to other elements. So we have so many red flags. And Dr. Dream, you've seen, the bees are disappearing, right?
Yeah, of course.
And insects across the board, in fact. So in regard to your pondering how people can stay asleep at the wheel, we have peer-reviewed study to prove that bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure. They're dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being. They can't even find their way back to the hive. And even with this peer-reviewed study, which I presented to the head beekeepers in California, no, nothing. It's like I didn't even pass the study on to them. I mean, it's truly perplexing. And based on current study, we've lost 80 to 90% of the insect populations globally. 80 to 90%, terrestrial and aquatic. Should that be alarming?
It all should be alarming. Now,
Yes.
I've got people in my orbit saying, "Oh, this is just another one of your conspiracy theories," and it's they're tying it to a political party. I mean, this goes beyond all of that. This is, I mean, it's got to be done by the puppet masters or at what level of government is there knowledge of this, do you believe?
Well, those are all great questions, and I certainly am on the same page with you exactly. It has nothing to do with any political party, although they use that at times to make it seem like it does. As CNN tried to imply that, like the right is implying this is, and some are in the right, in fact, unfortunately, implying this is something to do with elections or votes, elections which are selections, they're rigged. It's just theater to divide populations, and people should figure that out by now. But the those behind this, again, they're not part of any political party, and what populations don't want to know, and the notion this is a conspiracy theory, again, that is the most overused term, knee-jerk programmed reaction for the factless and the fearful that don't want to investigate, and they don't want to get any resistance from the herd, so they want to be a conforming member of the herd, not go against the grain, and that's getting old as well. So the bottom line is those in power know the planet cannot support this population any longer. We have about 36 countries descending into chaos right now. Dr. Dream, you've seen what's happening in Haiti, right?
I have seen what's happening in Haiti.
Horrible. Most Americans have no idea. It's like Mad Max there. And now we don't hear anything about it because we're being shown election theater 24/7. About 36 countries right behind Haiti. The dominoes are falling. When there's not enough to eat, you get a Mad Max scenario, and that's coming for all of us. In fact, have you seen any empty shelves lately, Dr. Dream, in any of your markets? Some things that are usually always there that aren't?
I haven't actually seen that in our travels yet, but I read about it and I see videos of people posting empty shelves in the stores.
Yeah, we're seeing some of that here. Where are you at again right now? Your location?
Right now, I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, but we spend this year, we'll be away from our home in Idaho for 11 and a half months doing our tour sound healing events all over the country. Um, but the skies are the same as you're describing them. We see the crisscrossing of the trails and dispersing and we see all of that everywhere, and it's
It is.
mind
Yeah,
blowing.
it is. And in California now, I'm in Northern California in a formerly lush forest that again is completely imploding. Um, and I've stated on the record for 15 years very certain conditions that the agricultural community should be acknowledging, foresters should be acknowledging, but they're not, like VPD, vapor pressure deficit, which means that when they can affect the atmospheric RH, relative humidity, in this way, and they're destroying the ozone layer. Climate engineering is the single greatest factor destroying the ozone layer, not hairspray cans. And we're getting UVC on the surface now. That's a DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. So that affects plants' photosynthesis and their stomata. From forests to crops, the flora has stomata, which is their respiratory ports with which they absorb carbon, release oxygen. That's not happening. And I've tried to bring this to light. This is called vapor pressure deficit again for 15 years. And just this week, now finally, we have mainstream scientists acknowledging that the forests are not respirating. Not why did it take so long? How could we know at geoengineeringwatch.org? How could I know? based on available data, and they not know. Certainly they knew, they're just not disclosing it. So we have forests like the Amazon burning to the ground. I believe the latest count on fires this year in the Amazon, something in the range of 70,000 this year alone. It's burning to the ground. It's done. The rivers are dry, and Americans have no clue. They want to watch election theater and order pizza and watch the football game. And that's not going to continue much longer. In fact, we had the world's biggest cruise ship launched this year. It looks like Disneyland on a boat, icon of the seas. And isn't that a paradox when you have oceans that are dead and dying all over the globe? Yeah, let's go cruise those oceans. So about the stomata again, the forests have no forest smell, none. Trees are completely dormant and dying. The wildlife populations we know are down 70+% conservatively in the last 50 years. And that's from a population that was already greatly reduced. So the writing is definitely on the wall. And I know people want a happy ending. I know that. Who wouldn't, right? But what I would argue, an example I give often, if you're standing in the middle of the freeway at rush hour, should you turn your back to traffic and think happy thoughts, or face traffic and do your best to dodge? And I would argue that the latter is much more reasonable to do. And so at this point at Geoengineering Watchdog, what we're trying to do, if all of us focused on this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, the interference with the planet's life support systems, the contaminating of every breath we take, and again, they can put something much more lethal in this mix anytime they want and level the playing field overnight. But if we focused on this and brought this to light, it would cause a shockwave all over the world. It's starting to happen, but we need to continue this momentum. We need to continue this so the populations know what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or consent. If we can expose what's happening in our skies, we have a chance of stopping it from the inside out. If we can do that, we could at least buy time. That's worth fighting for.
I watched again your documentary, The Dimming, the other night, and full of facts, full of experts in the field, and then clips of people that are behind this talking and admitting what they're doing, with no even concern for human life. David Keith just all of it. It's just, what kind of response are you getting from that documentary? I guess it's been out a few years now.
3 years, and in spite of really draconian social media censorship, we're over 25 million views with that film. And that's our post alone. There's hundreds of other posts, hundreds of other uploads of that film. But our original post is over 25 million views. And Dr. Keith, yeah, he's quite a piece of work. And as you saw in the film, for your listeners that don't know, he's the world's most recognized geoengineer. And at a international climate engineering conference in 2010, I believe, after Dr. Keith's symposium of proposal dumping tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the sky annually as part of geoengineering, my question to Dr. Keith was, and they only allowed about 3 questions in a room full of researchers and journalists, and mine was 1. And my question to him was, have you studied the toxicological effects of doing what you're proposing? Again, aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period, no exceptions. And Dr. Keith's first response was, well, we've looked at atmospheric particulate loading, and I'm paraphrasing, there's a lot of particles in the air and a little more won't hurt. Wait a minute. And I before I allowed them to cut me off, I followed up with this question. Those particles aren't aluminum. Have you studied aluminum? His answer was, no, we haven't. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. Now, how can a scientist not know in his very field of study that aluminum isn't toxic to all life forms? It is. Of course it is. Everyone knows it is. There's simply a level of insanity and tyranny and deception in the sciences, period. Isn't there, Dr. Dream? I mean, how safe and effective? Is that really accurate at this point? Is that not clear that that's not accurate either? I mean, how many fields of study do we have so-called experts that are either criminally ignorant or willfully committing crimes? I mean, take your pick. So in the case of climate engineering, again, whatever other causes of or concerns we have, and let's call it what it is, it's weather warfare, because these programs are not benevolent in any way, shape, or form. So if this continues at the current trajectory of die off of everything, and I'm not blaming everything on this, again, I recognize the other sources of damage, but this intentional intervention has done the most damage of all. But if we continue on this course, we are on an unimaginably limited time horizon, all of us.
So Dane, these people, who you're talking about and the ones behind it, are they somehow believing that they're protected? I mean, where's that? How does that fit in? Because we're all in this together. That how can they get out of it? They're still eating vegetables that have been grown in out of the ground that have, aluminum in them. They're still breathing it. How can they continue to do this when they're part of humanity?
Super important question. Thank you. That's maybe one of the most important of all. Why would they do this to themselves? And they already have in so many ways over so many decades. Let's backtrack a bit to the nuclear detonations, 2,400 of them, which has contaminated all life on the planet, including those who print the money, those who ultimately pull the strings. And Project Starfish Prime, Project Fishbowl, the detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere that they thought could collapse the entire atmosphere. But they did it anyway, just to see what would happen. We have Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. That will be an extinction event if other factors don't do the job first, which I would argue will be the case on the current course. And we have 442 more nuke plants around the globe. We're building 60 more right now. So we're not dealing with sanity. I want to make that clear. And we have psychoanalysis of those in power. And this is straight from the manual of analyzation. That the common thread in this form of psychosis and insanity is that it's a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Like an addict. In Dr. Dream, power is an addiction, right? I mean, those
Yeah.
in power are addicted to it. So do they care that the next fix might kill them or everything else with it? They don't. They don't. And you have this problem. You have a clinically insane power structure, and you have a population that is, at least so far, hopelessly out to lunch. They don't want to know the truth. And so you have a power structure that feels it has to defend itself and its tyranny by doing whatever it has to do. And that now involves culling the herd. Clearly, they are culling the herd and have been trying to chip away at it for many decades. But biosphere collapses beat them to the intersection. In their hubris, it appears they thought they could tech this damaged planet together a bit longer, but that's not working out. Planet's had enough, and it's responding. And we have methane releases around the globe. I know people have heard when they hear methane, they think of the climate science community blaming cow flatulence, and that's just designed to aggravate certain demographics in the population. If you have to cut down a forest to grow cows, to raise cows, then that's definitely a problem. But to compare cow flatulence with the methane expulsions that are happening in Arctic tundra, Arctic seafloor, in the Bermuda Triangle region, in the Atlantic, that's methane release. That's not a mystery anymore. It's as the oceans are radically heating and thawing, methane is releasing, migrates through the water column, hits the surface. If there's any vessel on the surface when that methane releases, it sinks because there's no buoyancy. The water's too aerated. So all this methane is releasing, going to the atmosphere, and that's covering the planet like a layer of glass. So we're in right now what's scientifically termed a runaway climate collapse. We would be lucky if we faced global warming or climate change. It's an abrupt climate collapse. Climate engineering making it worse, not better. So again, back to the power structure that's clinically insane and addicted to power, and a population that's addicted to consumerism and self-replication, if you will, propagating. And these two components are a very uh, lethal mix, if you will. We're hurtling toward near-term planetary omnicide. And what's near-term mean? Does that mean centuries or decades? No, no. It means on the current trajectory. And again, I stress this: if we can change course even a bit, it would. And starting with stopping climate engineering, we could buy time, and who knows what may be possible then. There's many factors we can't know, but at face value on the current trajectory, it is unlikely anyone will be here by the end of this decade. And I realize how incredibly impossible that seems to people to believe. And that's not taking into account nuclear cataclysm. Now let's add that on top, because climate engineering has damaged the ozone layer horrifically, other layers of the atmosphere as well, magnetosphere. So now we're very vulnerable to a CME, a coronal mass ejection. If a large one occurs that shuts down grids around the globe, now we have 100 Fukushimas or more. Game over. So again, we've painted ourselves into an unimaginably dire corner, and people are going about their lives like they're going to keep going like this, and that's not going to happen.
Now, ultimately, this technology could be turned around and help the situation, couldn't it?
That's a good question as well. If you had everyone on the same page, understanding the severity of our predicaments, could you once stop damaging the ozone layer? That's where you start, and contaminating the entire planet. Stop every form of damage that is possible to stop, and then there's processes that could help to rejuvenate the ozone layer, and to isolate that out, to make clear how severe a threat that is. We're on the cusp of functional ozone layer collapse. So what happens then? It means we lose plankton all over the globe. We're already losing that. Aside from the ocean pollution and the heating, and the UV is the single greatest factor of destroying plankton, because they have to feed in the upper layers of the water column to photosynthesize, and they're being fried by the UV. And no plankton, no people. Simple. That's bottom of the food chain for the planet. So if we could stay off the collapse of the ozone layer and allow it to recover, even with a much warmer planet that doesn't just go away, and too many people think that, we can just alter a few things and the planet will reset and everything will be fine. We're talking about geologic changes now that, based on past paleo events, would take tens of millions of years to recover. That's a long time. And that's if the damage stops. On the other side of that coin, we have Venus syndrome, where we've triggered so many feedback loops already, this has never happened in Earth's geologic past, never. Even in past epochs where we had warming, we had a warmer planet than we do today. We had an ozone layer still, and we didn't have the same geologic conditions. So if with this many feedback loops triggered, and again, methane is one, heating releases methane, methane migrates to the atmosphere, traps even more heat, even more heating, even more methane release. It's a feedback loop. About 50 of those going right now. So we are on track for what's known as Venus syndrome, and that's not a metaphor, which means a runaway greenhouse effect. The oceans eventually boil off into the atmosphere, and we have a true sister planet to Venus. And people that think that's impossible are simply not grounded in reality. They've done no research. They think the planet has some magic thermostat that always fixes itself, and that's just not reality.
Now, it's just so freaking heavy. We're headed into, an election. Is there either one of the candidates talking about this? I mean, I believe I heard Robert Kennedy Jr. talk about stopping the spraying, but you think anyone that gets elected can make a difference at this point?
Short answer, no. I would argue the last occupant of the White House that actually tried to draw a line in the sand was John F. Kennedy. He lived about a week after that. And since then, they're just dogs on leashes at best, and they know how long their leashes are. Trump certainly knows this is going on. And with Robert Kennedy. He interviewed me for an hour, and I think at that time he was less willing to face this issue because of the upcoming his run for president he knew was coming, and now he knows that's not going to happen, and he's has spoken out a couple times. In fact, I was scheduled to interview with Robert again last week, but his mother died, and that put that on the skids. We're sorry to have that happen, but hopefully we'll connect again. But I would argue no, there's no occupant of the White House that's going to do anything. We don't have elections, we have selections, and it's just used as political theater. And when do people figure that out? George Carlin certainly knew, didn't he?
Yeah,
If it made
absolutely.
any difference, they wouldn't let us do it, is what he said. Yeah. So no, not going to make a difference. We face a near-term existential threat. Anybody who, and it's perplexing the vast majority of people that don't see it. It's truly, truly perplexing. And when I first started to try to make known that trees were dying here in Northern California in 2008, I paid for out of pocket ad in the main Northern California newspaper, outlining everything that would happen if we didn't deal with this. And of course, you can understand the ridicule and blowback that occurs from people that don't want to know the truth. And everything I said would happen has. And even now, they are fast asleep at the wheel. Don't want to know. They're like kindergartners with their fingers in their ears. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Right? It's an interesting time.
Interesting is an understatement and doesn't near get the enormity of it, but you're right. Now, you're on the It's All Good show, so somehow we've got to bring it back to what can we do? We call them solutions. And what people are going to hear this, people that maybe haven't been focused on this yet, and they're going to watch your documentary, The Dimming, and they're going to be moved by all this because they're waking up and what can we do? What can we do?
That's the most important question, isn't it? And at the end of The Dimming, if you've seen the last 5 minutes, the epilogue, that the editor, who was really a godsend. I mean, we had lost 3 editors before that. The third editor was found dead 5 hours after I last talked to him, and probably just an amazing coincidence, right? But it is a pretty big coincidence. And I have the death certificate on my screen here. There's no cause of death, and he was from the entertainment industry, by the way. And I just want to put some context here. Those in the entertainment industry that make certain sort of NDA disclosures or commitments to in order to rise up through the ranks. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't know what existed there. I really don't. And I just know this individual was qualified, capable, rose to the occasion. And then 5 hours after I speak to him, he's found deceased. And then 5 hours after that, when our hard drive of all our data, all our footage, all our everything is FedEx to his doorstep, the next morning, that's not never been recovered either. I just it's pretty interesting. Okay, I'm not making any claims here. I'm just saying it's pretty interesting. But the fourth editor was a godsend, came from nowhere. He wanted to remain anonymous. Maybe that's why.
Right.
But the last 5 minutes in The Dimming, back to what can we do? And that was he pulled that out of statements I'd made during my broadcast over many years. And that's what I would want to say to everybody, that any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening. People have no idea how much power they may have if they simply set their mind to it. I would argue that if we apply ourselves wholly to a task that matters above all else, that whatever we may have otherwise fallen short, if we're fully applying ourselves to the task, the universe seems to help us along that path. I mean, I don't claim to know what's out there, but I don't think we're alone. And again, no matter what the case, doing what's right will always be right. And I would argue solace exists only in that place of knowing you're on the right path and doing what you know you should be doing given your individual circumstances. And again, if people would throw that pebble in the pond, who knows how far that ripple will go out and who it will affect and what other pebbles it will trigger. And again, it's if we could reach a critical mass of awareness and the proverbial pitchforks and torches moment hits when, and it's starting already here, and we could bring this to light, and those participating, especially in the military, realize and their families realize what they're participating in because they're being compartmentalized right now.
Right.
If we could reach that level of consciousness, Dr. Dream, who can say what's still possible? I mean, this whole planet was an absolute miracle. I marvel when I trek through the forest, and I mean everything. It's every insect and bird and tree and this the symbiotic relationship between all of it, and it's so miraculous. And we have been such abysmal stewards of this miracle planet. And if we could break that consciousness of self-annihilation, what might be possible? I would argue anything.
So someone that's listening to this, someone that's gonna go from this and watch the dimming, what's their next step? What give some practical suggestions. Gather their friends together to watch the dimming. What else can they do?
Super important question again. Thank you for being so on track, Dr. Dream, with exactly the right questions. Yes, a screening of The Dimming, great start. We made that film available for free the day it was done, in spite of expending tremendous resources and effort on it. We're not here for monetary anything. I'm here to try to save this planet. And a screening is a good start. You share credible data from a credible source. Geoengineering strives to be that source. Too many people hear something, someone said something, they saw some clickbait something online, and they just start regurgitating that, and that doesn't help. You have to know you're standing on solid ground. A leaky boat will not make the journey, if that makes sense. If you're making a journey across the most perilous ocean, and that's what this issue is, we're fighting incredibly dark forces that have so far controlled everything because they control the money. We have to have a watertight boat, and that means standing on credible data. And geoengineeringwatch.org does not affiliate with any other sources on this issue because we know of none that make the same effort we have made to take, in the case of the dimming, a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab with top scientists to altitude, sample what heavy aircraft were emitting, process that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, a world-renowned lab, all on film, all on the record, interviews with former U.S. Air Force generals, former government scientists, former presidential cabinet members, Canadian Minister of Defense, Canadian premiers. There's a lot of hard data in that film, thankfully, as you cited earlier. So you share credible data. That's how you start a spot fire of awareness that will continue to burn. And you ask those whom you awaken to do the same. And that branches out exponentially and much faster than people realize. If a person credibly conveyed data to two people on the first day of a 30-day month, and those two to two each the second day, and so on for 30 days, it's into the millions. And when people hear that, they think, no, that can't be. It is. Do the math. An exponential equation. And that's what we need to do. Credible data from a credible source. Start spot fires of awareness. Stoke those fires until they merge into a blaze that can't be put out.
I appreciate all of that. I appreciate you taking your time to come on this podcast and to speak to me and most of all, Dane, I appreciate your passion for this and your dedication and your devotion. And I hope other people feel that and that it brings that up in themselves. You've had an impact on me since I met you, and I want to do whatever I can possibly do. We want people to go to geoengineeringwatch.org. They can subscribe, they join the email list, go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, you want to be on the front line, you want the information. This is how to get it. You have an incredible amount of documentation available. And for the new people, it all starts with watching The Dimming because it is well put together and factual and presents it in a way. I mean, it'll sink you. It'll sink you to watch this, but then we've got to realize the power we have and what we can do, as you were saying, that we can all make a difference, but we can't make a difference if we don't do anything.
We can't. And the same gratitude right back to you, Dr. Dream. You have asked all the essential questions very articulately, and that's the kind of help we need in this battle. That kind of focused effort. We're playing chess. We need to learn how to play well. All is at stake. And in the coming weeks and months, the weather and temperature whiplash scenarios that I'm sure you've seen, Dr. Dream, where it's 80 degrees one day and snow falling the next and back to 80 the day after. And we're going to see a lot more of that. And that is because they're losing ground by the day. We're in a runaway event, and the only way they can cool things down on the surface is when there's enough moisture overhead. They chemically nucleate it, and that creates a flash cool down event, but it doesn't last long, and it's lasting less duration with each passing day. So we are in a runaway train, but if we all stand together, who knows what good we may yet accomplish, even at this late hour. And again, my gratitude to you for having really a very accurate focus on the key aspects of this equation, key questions. And again, my gratitude to you for that.
Thank you so much, Dane, and I look forward to seeing you in person again one day, and one day standing on top of a mountain with you, saying, "Look at this! All of us, we turned it around." That would be my dream.
I
Thank you
live
so
for that
much
day.
for joining us.
I live for that day. The honor was mine. Thank you very much for your attention to this most dire issue. My gratitude to all your listeners and followers. It's our collective efforts that can yet make a difference.
Thank you.